The laptop wasn't even mine to begin with. That's what I keep coming back to, even now. If my son-in-law hadn't left it on the kitchen counter that Tuesday morning, if he hadn't asked me, of all people, to drop it off at the repair shop on my way to pick up my granddaughter from school, none of this would have come to light. Or maybe it would have, just too late. My name is Earl. I'm 64 years old, retired from 31 years as a civil engineer with the county. And I live in the same house in Dayton, Ohio, that my wife Carol and I bought in 1987. Carol passed 4 years ago, breast cancer. Since then, it's been me, my tabby cat Winston, and the kind of quiet that takes some getting used to. My daughter Sabrina married Kevin 8 years ago. I remember standing at the back of that church, thinking he seemed decent enough. Steady job in finance, polite. Remembered to shake my hand after the ceremony. He called me sir for the first 2 years. I respected that. Over time, I started to think of him as something close to a son, which, when I think about it now, makes my stomach turn in a way I can't quite describe. They bought a house about 12 minutes from mine. My granddaughter, little Rosie, she was 6 then, she's 9 now. She and I have our routine. Tuesdays and Thursdays, I pick her up from Clearview Elementary. We stop for a hot chocolate at the place on 5th that she likes, and I drop her home by 4. It's the best part of my week. I don't say that lightly. That Tuesday started like any other. I was already dressed, keys in hand, when Sabrina called. Dad, Kevin left his work laptop on the couch last night and the screen's cracked. He needs it for a presentation Thursday. Can you take it to Andy's on your way to get Rosie? I already called. They said they can look at it same day. Andy's Computer Repair. It's a small shop on Wilmington Pike. Been there since before Carol died. I'd taken my own desktop there twice. The owner, a man named Phil, knows me by name. I said yes without thinking twice. Why would I think twice? I grabbed the laptop bag, drove to the shop, and handed it over the counter to Phil. He asked me what the issue was. I said the screen was cracked. Client needed it back by Wednesday if possible. He said he'd look at it. I gave him my number since I was the one dropping it off, and I left. I had Rosie in the car 40 minutes later. We got our hot chocolates. She told me about a boy in her class who ate paste. I laughed. It was a normal Tuesday. Phil called me at 5:17 that evening. The way he said Earl when I picked up, that was the first thing. Not his usual businesslike tone. Something careful in it. Something I couldn't name right then. I need you to come in, he said. Not tomorrow, tonight if you can. And Earl, don't mention this call to anyone in that household. I mean it. I sat with that for a moment. Phil, what's going on? Just come in, please. I told him I'd be there in 20 minutes. Then I sat in my armchair for 5 of those 20 minutes, staring at the wall, trying to decide if I was overreacting to a strange phone call or underreacting to something I didn't yet understand. I drove to the shop. Phil flipped the sign to closed before I even got through the door. He didn't say anything at first. He set the laptop on the counter and turned it to face me. The screen, which he'd already replaced with a spare, showed an email thread. I don't know exactly what I expected. What I did not expect was my own name. The thread was between Kevin and a woman I didn't recognize, an email address I'd never seen, a name I didn't know. The subject line read, Timeline, EH Estate, EH, my initials, Earl Hutchins. I read slowly. My vision did something strange around the edges. The emails discussed in plain and practical language, the transfer of assets, my house, the one Carol and I bought together, the one Rosie had taken her first steps in, the one I'd replaced the roof on in 2019, was referenced specifically. So was my life insurance policy, the one I'd held with MetLife since 1998, with Sabrina named as sole beneficiary. There were references to accelerating the timeline. There were references to my health. Kevin had apparently told this woman, whoever she was, that I'd been having dizzy spells and that the doctor's visits are becoming more frequent. That was a lie. I hadn't been to Dr. Pearson since my annual checkup in March, which was routine. Everything had come back fine. and then the one that made the floor feel unsteady under my feet. The policy pays double for accidental death. We need to be smart about this. Phil had his arms crossed and was watching me the way you watch someone who just got news that hasn't landed yet. How long have you had it? I said, finally. I opened it to check the operating system before starting on the screen. It was already open on the desktop. I wasn't snooping, Earl. It was right there. I believe you. Are you okay? I wasn't, but I said, I need to think. Phil is a practical man. He's ex-Air Force, spent 20 years maintaining avionics equipment, and he doesn't rattle easily. He told me he hadn't touched anything, hadn't forwarded anything, hadn't closed the thread. He asked if I wanted him to make copies. I said yes. He printed every email in that thread, 14 pages, and put them in a manila envelope. Then he said something I've thought about many times since. Go to the bank first. Tonight, if it's still open. Tomorrow morning the 2nd, they unlock the doors. Change every password you have, and I mean every one. Don't go home and sleep on this and wait. You move now. He was right. I knew he was right. And still my feet felt like they were cemented to that linoleum floor. I drove to the Fifth Third branch on Far Hills Avenue. It was 6:48. They were closed. I sat in the parking lot and called the after-hours fraud line and had my accounts flagged. The woman on the phone walked me through it without drama, the way those people are trained to do. When I hung up, I called my attorney, a man named Gordon I'd used for Carol's estate, who I knew wouldn't mind an after-hours call for something like this, and left him a message telling him I needed to see him first thing in the morning, that it was urgent. Then I sat there in that parking lot for a long time. The thing about a moment like that, and I don't know how to say this without it sounding like something from a movie, because it doesn't feel real even in memory, is that your mind doesn't go to the dramatic place first. It goes to the small places. I thought about the way Kevin had shaken my hand at that wedding. I thought about the Christmas 3 years ago when I'd lent him $8,000, no questions asked, because he said they were behind on the mortgage. He'd paid it back, which I thought meant something. I thought about Rosie. Her face when I pick her up from school, the way she runs toward the car. She doesn't know anything. She can't know anything. I thought about Carol and how she'd always said there was something about Kevin she couldn't quite settle on. I'd dismissed it. I told her she was being protective. A mother's instinct, I said, not a red flag. Carol had been right. I drove home. I did not call Sabrina. I didn't know yet what her role was, and that not knowing was its own kind of pain. A separate wound that I kept pressing on and couldn't stop. Her name wasn't in those emails. But absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, and I'd spent enough years as an engineer to know the difference. I called Gordon at 8 the next morning. He saw me at 9:30. I brought the envelope. He read through the pages slowly, asked me several questions, and then leaned back in his chair and said, "Earl, this is a criminal matter. We need to go to the police." I'd known that. I think I'd known it since the parking lot the night before. Hearing someone else say it made it more real, and less real, at the same time. Gordon called a contact at the Dayton Police Department, a detective named Reyes, whom he'd worked with before. And by noon that day I was sitting in a beige room downtown, going through everything I knew. Detective Reyes was younger than I expected. She was thorough. She asked questions in a way that didn't feel like she doubted me, but also didn't feel like she was taking anything for granted, which I respected. I told her about the laptop, about Phil, about the emails, about the MetLife policies, about my assets, my house, the phrase accelerating the timeline. She told me not to alert Kevin. She told me to behave exactly as I normally would. She told me they would need time. I went home and fed Winston and sat at the kitchen table and stared at the wall some more. The hardest part of the next 8 days. And I want to be honest about this, because I think people who haven't lived through something like it don't understand, was not the anger. The anger came later, and it was clean, almost a relief. The hardest part was the performance. Picking up Rosie on Thursday, like nothing had happened. answering Kevin's text, asking if the laptop was ready with a casual Phil said, tomorrow. Sitting across from him at Sabrina's dining room table on Sunday for dinner, eating the chicken she'd made, helping Rosie cut her meat. I watched Kevin across that table and I thought, you looked me in the eye at Carol's funeral and told me she was a remarkable woman. You said that, and you meant it, or you performed meaning it well enough that I believed you. And all this time, you've been looking at me and calculating. I excused myself to use the restroom and stood over the sink with both hands on the cold porcelain and just breathed. Detective Reyes called me on a Monday morning, 11 days after I'd first sat in that beige room. She said they had enough. The woman in the emails had been identified. She was a former colleague of Kevin's, who had a prior fraud conviction in Indiana that I won't detail here. The digital evidence from the email thread, combined with financial records subpoenaed from Kevin's accounts, showed a clear pattern. There were transfers I didn't know about, from a joint account Kevin maintained with Sabrina, into a third account I'd never heard of. Smaller amounts over 2 years, that added up to just under $40,000. Amounts small enough not to trigger automatic alerts. They arrested Kevin at his office on a Wednesday. Sabrina called me 40 minutes later, hysterical. That phone call was the second hardest thing. She said she didn't know. She said it over and over. She said she didn't know about any of it. Didn't know about the emails. Didn't know about the woman. Didn't know about the accounts. She was crying in a way that I'd only heard once before from her when we lost Carol. I sat on my couch and listened and tried to figure out which part of me believed her. The part that knew her as a child, the girl who used to bring me dandelions from the backyard and call them flowers, the teenager who sat with me in the hospital for hours when I had my appendix out at 51. That part believed her without question. The part that had spent 11 days performing normalcy at a dinner table and in text message threads believed nothing easily anymore. I told her I loved her. I told her I needed some time before I could say anything else. She said she understood. I'm not sure she did. I'm not sure I did either. The investigation expanded. It turned out Kevin had taken out a supplemental life insurance policies on me, something you can apparently do as a son-in-law under certain conditions. I won't pretend to fully understand. 18 months prior, neither I nor Sabrina had known about it. The policy was substantial. The phrase accidental death in those emails was not incidental. What they were planning, specifically, was never fully confirmed in court. But the financial forensics were enough. Kevin was charged with wire fraud, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. That last one, I'll be honest, stung in a way I hadn't anticipated. It forced me to see myself through a legal lens I'd never expected. Vulnerable adult. I'm 64. I still run 3 miles twice a week. But the law is the law, and the designation was accurate in the context of the statute, and I let it go. Kevin's attorney tried to frame it as financial stress, a bad decision that never went further than email, nothing that actually harmed anyone. Gordon, sitting beside me in the courtroom, exhaled slowly through his nose when he heard that argument. I put my hand flat on the table and said nothing. The jury didn't need long. Kevin stood for sentencing on a Thursday morning in March, 8 months after Phil had turned that laptop screen toward me in his shop on Wilmington Pike. The judge, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and reading glasses, she kept pushing up with one finger, read the charges and the findings in a level, unhurried voice. Kevin received 6 years. He will be eligible for parole in 4. He turned and looked at me as they moved to take him out. I don't know what he was looking for. I held his gaze until he looked away. I'm not sure I felt anything in that moment, which is something I've sat with since. I expected to feel something large. What I felt was tired. Sabrina was not charged. The investigation found no evidence of her involvement, which aligned with what she had told me and what I had, slowly, allowed myself to believe. Our relationship has been, I don't know the right word, recalibrated. Tender in a way that is different from before, careful in a way that might be permanent. We don't talk about Kevin unless we have to. We talk about Rosie. We talk about what she needs and what Sabrina needs, and whether selling the house makes sense. Sabrina is doing that. Starting over. It is not easy to watch, and I try to help where I'm useful. I still pick up Rosie on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Last week, she told me about a science project on ecosystems. She'd chosen wetlands because she said they look kind of ugly, but they're actually doing everything. I told her that was a very smart observation. She said her teacher had given her an A. I drove her home and pulled up in front of the house, and she got out and ran up the front walk and then stopped and turned around, the way she sometimes does, and waved at me with her whole arm like I was far away. I waved back. I sat in the car for a minute before I drove away. The afternoon light was doing something particular to the trees on that street. I thought about Carol and about how she would have handled all of this better than I did, more cleanly, with less sitting alone in parking lots. I thought about how much had happened in 8 months and how ordinary a Tuesday morning can look from the outside. I thought about Phil and how I owe him more than I've managed to say. Then, I put the car in drive and went home. And I fed Winston, and I made myself a cup of coffee, and I sat on the back porch in the afternoon quiet that I am still, after 4 years, learning to live inside.